I'm Isabella.
I'm Tullia. I'm sorry. Good to meet you. Okay. Oh, and here is. No. Well, yes, if that's the new one. Then yeah, they're the same thing. So if you've already made notes on one or whatever, go ahead. There's some student judging stuff, and there's actually a form I'm supposed to fill out. I'll take that back. That one's me. So, start my timer here.
Your actual piece, you might have pointed out that appeared close appearance.
I'm Tullia. I'm going to be talking about the Roman stola, which is an overdress, and display. The biggest challenge for me when looking at Roman artwork is identifying what you can use of the primary materials. There's a lot of frescoes, there's a lot of statues, but a lot of their work is representational of mythical stories. It's metaphorical. They're presenting an emperor as a god. So you have to kind of tease out what's everyday life versus fantasy, basically, or history. Their idea of what people wore, 1,000 years ago. And you also have to separate out, I was really focusing on what upper class matron would have worn out in public. So I'm eliminating the scenes where they're hanging out at home in just a transparent tunic, because it doesn't matter if the slaves see you, right? And what a matron would have worn out in public. And being very naughty here, appearing without my palla. So if we're outside in the world, I should be wearing my palla, and if we're outside, I'm going to further have my head covered with my palla, and this is to protect me from the sun and also just from the gaze of random men. The pudicita, the modesty of the Roman woman, is very important. That's kind of the goal. It's a very socially conservative period, I'm working hard to show that I'm a modest, virtuous woman. I'm going to take this off because it's bulky and it's kind of hold it on, and we're not outside anyway, so I'm going to ditch it for now. So when people, this basic outfit that I'm going to be discussing of the tunica, the stola, and the palla, which is the shawl, I call it like the three-piece suit for Roman women. You often see these on websites and people say this is what Roman women wore. But of course, we're talking about 1,000 years, we're talking about multiple continents if you look at the whole Roman world. And it changed a lot from place to place, it changes with status, so I'm narrowing down just for about 400 years, mid-Republic to early empire, and I'm looking just at the higher class married women. If you want to talk about other status and other areas, I'm happy to discuss that, but I'm going to try and stay focused in my 20 minutes. So the stola in particular is a garment that's very iconic, and it's known for 4 main recognizable features. It is worn as an overdress with a tunica underneath. It is made of wool. It is a tube that's fastened at the shoulders, and then it's double belted, so you get this extra layer over the hips. And that's to help emphasize the hips. The Roman ideal of beauty is small breasts, wide hips, because one of our main jobs is to give children to Rome, especially boys, hopefully. Basically, working wool and giving birth to children are our 2 main jobs as women. And then there's also like taking care of the hearth and the house, raising whatever children we've already got. The stola is super important as a symbol of the matron. and it was extremely desirable. Women fought for the right to wear it for a long time until they suddenly didn't, and we're going to talk about that later. But it was very representative of the pudicita of a matron, to the point that it provided some legal and social protections that were pretty profound. So the definition of a matron who gets to wear this thing, this is a woman who is married to a citizen, except for a little wrinkle we'll talk about later. It's a woman who is not an adulteress, she's not a prostitute, she's not a dancer, she's not an actress, she's a very virtuous, upstanding, moral lady, hopefully popping out sons. This did change. So the Vestus Longa, as it originally was known, in the 5th century BCE, when this first started, was only for freeborn women. And then about the Second Punic War, at least by the Second Punic War, we know that freed slave women also got to wear it if they married a citizen. And that was a thing that happened commonly. Slaves were often freed either due to good work or their masters freed them in the will or whatever. It was an upwardly mobile situation for them. And this was something that they fought for really hard because the protection was pretty profound. If a woman was walking down the street wearing a stola and she was attacked, raped, mugged, whatever, the criminal would be prosecuted much more heavily than if she were not wearing a stola. So if you chose not to wear one, and you could have, too bad. There are also some legal protections, even if she were accused of adultery in court. The prosecutor could not manhandle or grope her, and he could if she were not wearing a stola. So this is a very important garment that really is separate from other garments in the way it's described and treated. But this starts to shift. For some reason, there's this big desire to get the stola and wear the stola until we get to the end of the Republic. There's this huge upheaval. There's 2 civil wars. There's a lot of new trade happening as we're conquering other lands. There are new ideas coming in, exposure to other systems. And there's also, and I'm not sure which of these factors is really the one that makes the stola fade, but there's also potentially some blowback from Augustus. So, as I said, the Roman Republican culture was very socially conservative, very fixed social roles, and very idealized morals. Augustus, when he was as first emperor, was very concerned with making Rome great again and getting back to like the ultimate socially, like, you people are all running around willy-nilly and we need to get back to being proper. So he started legislating things that single people would be taxed more heavily than married people. He was trying really hard to get everybody paired up and generating more kids. He was very angry that men weren't wearing their togas. So he legislated that no one could enter the forum without a toga. And then the same thing, women are not wearing their stolas, and people are raging about this. How are we supposed to know who's a respectable woman and who's not if you're not wearing your stola? So this legislation fails. You know, it's too late. The horse is out of the barn. People are done wearing them. And a lot of the books that I looked at, when asked, like if they address at all why the stola fails and why it goes out of fashion, they just say it's voluminous, it's expensive, it's a lot of fabric, and it's a pain in the butt to wear, and it's not attractive. But that's been true for 400 years, basically, and people still wore it and still wanted it and still fought for the right to wear it. So I think that it has more to do with the social changes. And sometimes fashion just changes and you have no idea why. But this is a topic that I would really like to pursue further. I think there's a lot of different options there. But the early empire, it's really fading out of fashion. It's pretty much only senatorial wives are now wearing them. especially by the Flavian period particularly, which is like 69 to 96 CE. In Pompeii, there are a couple of paintings of the stola, but a lot of the daily life stuff, women aren't wearing them. It's too late. It's pretty much gone already. There are some mentions of it in plays and things where people refer back to the stola, but it's done metaphorically. Even in artwork and portraits, some women are shown wearing them. You'll have an empress presented, or a very rich lady presented in a stola, even though she didn't wear one in real life, because it's a symbolic of her virtue and her pudicita and all that she was a good woman. By the early 200s, it shows up in some plays as kind of a marker of Roman identity, and like, this is a woman from Rome, and things out in the provinces, but it's not really connected so much to the stola as it used to exist. It's more of this woman's from Rome and she's high status. It eventually just disappears. It was retained in language even into the 3rd century. The equestrian wives are referred to as stola wearers, even though they don't wear them anymore. And it's just a language remnant that, this is like hanging up the phone, which we don't hang up anymore. We hit a button, but whatever. So it's that kind of thing. So that's the social context. In looking at the stola itself, it's worn with, as I said, these other 2 pieces. This is worn out in public, and this is the palla, the shawl. It's been a bit of a challenge in trying to reproduce it because it covers it, as you can see so well. You can see the top and bottom if you're lucky. And of course the size of your stola is going to grow with your wallet. So sometimes they're really voluminous and you can't even see the bottom. So I'm going to take her palla off. So you can get a better look. And I'm also very happy to talk about the jewelry, by the way. That's a huge other passion of mine. So what you can see here is that it is a tube. And it's double belted. But first I want to talk about the wool itself. So first of all, the stola is always described as being made of wool. The books always say generally, or they just say made of wool. Nobody ever uses the word always, because you don't want to use those words in scholarly writings. But I've never seen a discussion of stola that mentioned any other fabric. Likewise, when I've seen mentions of other fabrics, they're always talking about other garments. The toga, same thing. The toga is very analogous. It's the male version. It's the upright, respectable citizen garb. It's the business suit for men. And that is also made of wool. The wool is very important in Roman life. It has a special feature. It's filled with animus, spirit, because it comes from a live animal, as opposed to linen, which comes from a plant, or leather, which comes from a dead animal. So wool, all ritual garments, things worn by priests doing rituals. When a bride gets married, her entire clothing, head to toe, including her slippers, are all wool because of those protective magical properties. So we know that wool is special. We know that ritual garments are made of wool. I don't know specifically that the stola was considered a ritual garment, but it did have those special legal and social protections. It did seem to have a life separate from a tunic or a palla. So I'm pretty confident that they were generally, if not always, wool. And most people think of this sort of wool like it's kind of heavy blanket stuff, and so they're really resistant to recreating one. But this is closer to the wool they would have worn. This, a lot of people think, is cotton from a distance. It's very fine, it's very fine thread, and it's not even woven quite loosely enough. It's a basic tabby weave, and it should be a little more open so it drapes a little better. That's how you get the gorgeous drapes that you see on the statuary and the frescoes. You can't get it anymore. The sheep are different. I've got a huge appendix B is about the sheep and how the breeds have changed. I'd love to get into that if you want to. Also, the weaving is different. The cloth is woven tighter. Even if you can find a tropical wool that is not herringbone or gray, commercially, if you get lucky, you find a blue one, it's still a little too stiff to do the kind of gorgeous draping that they're doing. That's been my biggest challenge as a reenactor, and I would love to eventually spin and weave my own, but that's a lot of time when you're talking about thread as fine as this. So it's a tube. This version, the top literally becomes the armhole and the neckline. And it's usually pinned back over the front based on the statuary. You can also have straps. The straps are often, but not always, part of the stola kind of characteristics. Then there's a banded stola, which there's a picture of it on page 22. And that one is really unusual in terms of Roman garments because usually there's rectangles. They're woven to shape, and they're woven to size and then just kind of seamed around the edge. Don't worry about it. It was filming me. Don't worry about it. But the banded stola is different because it is pleated. And I really wanted to do that with this green one, but it's just too stiff. It just would have looked awful, so I gave that up. But it's pleated like this, and then gathered across the top with a band to create a very different look. And I would have thought if I found that one statue, I would have thought maybe it was a one-off, maybe it was a regional variation. But there's this male actor wearing the same style. It was found at Pompeii, and if a male actor representing a woman is on stage wearing this, obviously it's an identifiable female garment, right? So, in terms of and then there's the gathered shoulders, and this is a style that I've seen with other recreationists do. I cannot back it up in the extant record, where they basically take the shoulders and just squish a whole bunch of fabric together and then do a roll around it. And there's a picture, 23 is where the picture is. And I used a picture of a Hollywood costume because I didn't want to, call on any particular Scadian that I know and love. But I think that this is a misunderstanding of a Greek style to wear a tunica where they gathered it, possibly with a flat pin, like a flat fibula type pin. We don't have any extant records of those pins, but you can see in a couple of statues where it seems like there is something that is stiff and separate from the fabric, and that kind of makes sense to me. That's again another area of research I would like to go in. But generally there's a straight tube with a double belting, and that gives you that nice wide hip flounce. In terms of embellishment, they are generally solid color. They don't do stripes, they don't do spots or anything like that. That's a Byzantine thing, which is a couple hundred years later, long after the stolas died. The only real decoration you see is the instatia, which is a contrast colored hem. And this is not mandatory. There are some pictures, frescoes in Pompeii of straight ones, which is why I did 2 out of 3 women have instatia. These are mentioned as sometimes sewn in instatia, and I was kind of wondering, because my first assumption was, well, why wouldn't it just be woven in? You just use a different color, thread for that section. But my brilliant slave last night made the observation that, you have this long garment which comes down and covers your feet. This one's a little too short, it's one of the things wrong with this. Once I add an instatia to it, it'll be perfect. So you're walking in this filthy street with, grossness out there, and it's a long garment. with a sewn-in bit, you can replace it or take it off and clean it much more easily than ruining your entire thing. I missed a bit about woolworking. When talking about wool in general and how important it was, it's for women. It's a huge part of their culture. Women are known for their woolworking and generating kids, as I said, and so they're supposed to make these garments themselves. And that does start to change with the empire, with more trade coming in and the finished garments being sold in the marketplace. Women are supposed to make their own, but not everyone is a good wife. Some people like to, go out to see plays and hang out, and drink with their buddies. So sometimes they buy their own. They buy the fabric instead. And that I have seen authors refer to that as the beginning of the disappearance of the stola, but I think it's more of a symptom than a cause. And that's exactly 20 minutes. So, anybody got questions?
So we're going to kind of be a little random because I'm not sure if we're going to keep the research paper.
Sure.
But tell me a bit about how they would have woven the fabric, the type of loom.
Sure.
I noticed all of yours are done, cross, weft, horizontally to the ground. Would they have done that? Sort of speak more to the technique.
Right. So my understanding is that they did wear them with the selvage on the top and bottom, and for a stola, that becomes problematic because of the vast length. If you're talking about a garment that is potentially 1.5 to 2 times the height of the wearer, that's kind of ridiculous it'd be a hugely horizontal loom. So I was postulating maybe there is a seam that's hidden by the fold here. I don't know. In terms of the type of loom, they used warp-weighted looms and also the double bar loom. And I've got references for both of those. Probably about page 16 there. I looked at Gleba a lot for that. I love Margarita Gleba's books for the weaving stuff. And we know from that the threads are super fine, thanks to some of the studies on loom weights. The weights, you can't put too many threads on a single weight, otherwise it starts to pull them in and you get these weird gaps and your tension's not right in your weaving. So lighter loom weights means lighter threads. And they did find much lighter loom weights in the Mediterranean area as compared to Britain and other parts of the world that were under Roman control. Back to the weaving style. So there were some woven in, there's one, it's a tunica, but there is a woven in tablet, according to Madron. She said it's probably tablet woven beginning, where you do the fancy weaving, and then you turn it up, and that becomes your warp. Are you a weaver? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, but
okay.
But yeah, where they start off basically with with the top of the weft.
Right. Yes.
Basically,
yeah.
like
The
a
weft
tablet
becomes
woven.
the warp. Yeah. But her feeling and everything that I've read in Gleba, it seems like they're using the selvage edges for the top and bottom, and then on the side, and the seam is usually on the left, according to Schultz. She went and looked at a bunch of statues, and because it's just a big rectangle. The seam is on the left side because when your palette is on, the left is mostly covered because of how the palette is wrapped, so it hides the seam. So they would have just had two edges here, the top and bottom of the thing, and they would probably whip stitch them together or do a fold over and hem, which is what I do on mine. And everything's hand sewn. And I used Heather Jones. Yes, Heather Jones' site to research the seams and the sewing. And some of my stolas I've actually used a brass needle, which would have been period. And, but the linen thread doesn't hold up as very well. It's kind of a pain. So I've gone to modern thread, sadly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
got more.
Sure.
Okay, so in your documentation, research paper, you talk
Sure.
a bit about some tree laws.
Yes.
Can you go more into how that would have impacted how these were made, how these were dyed, what colors?
Okay. So the colors, sumptuary laws, a lot of them are actually a little bit later. They're more into the empire than earlier, but they were more about jewelry than fabric that much. Later, of course, Nero wouldn't let anybody wear purple. He'd kill you if you did. I didn't see any images of these done with purple. There's a lot of pastels, pink and like a light teal color, greens. I saw a lot of that, and of course blues. Indigo, madder, saffron, lichen. They're using those kind of things, mushrooms to dye. Purple, of course, you can use Murex, but that's mostly reserved for those thin stripes that men wear, the clavi. Kids wear them too. It's a protective thing, and then of course it appears on the togas. But I haven't seen. There's some mentions of purple used. There was actually one of a prostitute wearing purple, and I don't remember the date on that. I think it was like late first century. I've also I read an article it was based on fabric finds from a Roman-controlled section of Egypt, where they had a bunch of purple, but it wasn't Murex. It was madder over-dyed over indigo, where they did 2 sets of dyes to create the purple. I don't know how popular that was. I kind of intentionally left it out of my paper because I wasn't sure about the purple, and that's something I want to investigate more before I start making any claims about it.
So, about the colors, and a question about colors. Does it come from? Is it coming from frescoes? Is it coming from chemical analysis? Or what? So what? How do we know what? How do we know what we're looking at?
Right. We don't have much, if any, fabric samples from my time and place. We've got some Egyptian stuff, which I just talked about, the purple. We've got a lot of frescoes, and we've got some writings. We also have some statues with microscopic, because the statues are all painted. So we have some, one of the Gleba books I cite in there talks about the colors that they found. I didn't write down what page number my colors are on, but it's in the embellishment section. So they mentioned the blue and the green and those things. So so short answer: frescoes, statuary remnants, and the writings that are from contemporary authors. That's what I'm working from.
So the different shoulder connections, is there a progression from one style to another, or do they come all at the same time? Can you tell?
They seem to be. The problem is a lot of the images, unless we know specifically who the woman is, they give a range. They give a century that they're from. So it's really difficult to pin down specific trends. When I was looking at the twin strap stola for a minute, I'd never come across that, and then all of a sudden I saw a whole bunch of them, and I realized it was all from this German author, and I thought, oh, maybe this is a German variant, right? Like in the Rhine. But then I found some other ones that were older and more Mediterranean, so I abandoned that. One of the projects I really would like to do is set up a timeline with every single bit of evidence I can find and see if I can find trends for them, because as of now, I am not able to tease them out. And it's possible that with a very strict timeline and kind of like, okay, this one goes from here to here, and this one goes from here to here, and this one's at this point, and then maybe I can see some more trends of evolutions. I think that'd be really fun. I will say that if you use straps, you need less fabric, because they don't have to come all the way up. So this one comes all the way up now. Actually, I was intending to put straps on this, so it doesn't quite fit me. I didn't have time to make the straps, so it doesn't quite fit, but I could add straps and then it would fit. So if you've got the money to buy them or order the time, I guess depending on whether you're going to be a good wife or not, either the time or money to have the more fabric, you can deal with it pinned at the shoulders. So that might have been a bit of a status thing, but I don't know. I'm just guessing at that point.
There's nothing you found in the written records that sort of indicates anything
No,
sort of.
I didn't find nobody. I think it was probably more of a fashion thing because it doesn't seem to have meant anything. Which types? No, but I didn't come across anything anyway. I'm sorry?
Are there other like secondary terms for women, or with the stola being kind of reserved?
I'm not sure what you mean, like a cloak or something?
Yeah, because who's wearing their tunic, and the stola's reserved.
Oh,
are there other kind
well,
of,
there's the palla, right? So if it's cold, you can throw on a palla. In the Mediterranean, that's not as much of an issue. In the provincial areas, they're going to take on whatever their local style was. Cloaks were a thing. They were worn more by men, but there was a thing called a mantle, which was worn by both men and women, which is basically a rectangular shawl that's pinned. But they don't talk about that a whole lot. I just found like little brief mentions here and there. So the tunica can be long sleeved, so that's useful to provide a little more warmth or coverage. And the length is going to vary in the tunica based on your status. So basically, the richer you are, the longer it is, down to just covering your feet so your toes peek out.
And how do we know that?
That's a good question. From artwork, you see the slaves with short stuff. You see, I'm trying to think if I've actually read that in books or if I've just. I've read that in summary, like Sebesta and Kroom, where they kind of sum things up for you. I don't know that I've seen Ovid write about the length of a tunic. That's not really the kind of thing he got into. But you can see in the pictures that the higher class, like the women are wearing the super long stuff, and the slaves that are attending them, it's right at the knee. So it just stands to reason. Fabric is hard to crank out. You're not gonna throw it away on a slave. And the palette and toga, to some extent, they're kind of proof that you don't have to do any work because they're a pain in the butt to hold on. They're not pinned in place. So, and particularly like the toga is like 9 yards. It's just an enormous, it's an enormous hassle, and men complain about it all the time. They talk about like vacationing in the summer away from Rome so they don't have to wear the stupid toga. You basically have to have a slave follow you, constantly correcting the folds to keep it from falling off of you. And your hands aren't free because you're holding it on. So your slaves are carrying your money and all your stuff. And the same thing I've even found running around when I'm being good and modest and I have my palla on, I really need my slave Drusa to help carry my stuff because I need my hands to hold my palla on. And so this is one of these situations where the clothing really informs the social context and the status because you just can't do physical work while you're wearing one of these things. You do see pictures of them at home where they've got the palla tied around the waist, where they're just like, I'm done wrestling with this thing, and it's just slaves here anyway, no one can see me, so it's fine if my nipples are visible, whatever. And they, they're disrobed.
Now, do you find it's a style that they held on to more in Rome than elsewhere? Like with the men's clothing, where you didn't wear pants,
right?
But everywhere else they're going, well, in Rome you don't wear pants,
right? Unfortunately, most of the writers I'm working on were Rome-based, so I haven't found a whole lot out in the provinces. I would love to investigate, more artwork from out there. Unfortunately, most of the artwork, frankly, that I'm using is from Pompeii, so it's pretty close. I'm going to guess that the farther away you get from Rome, the more influenced you are by provincial things and the weather. but I don't have any good evidence for that just yet.
Is there any distinction between, talked about how part of the matron's job was to weaving wool. Was there any distinction between having a stola that was woven herself and one of others?
Not that I know of. I mean, how could you tell? You know, there's women would put on a show of being weavers. You know, if you've got company over, they're going to be their wool basket is a thing. Sebesta writes about the wool basket, so it would be like prominently at the entry when guests come over to the house, so they see it as they enter the villa. She might be working on it publicly as so there's this client patron system where the patrons would come. The clients would come to the patron's house every morning and kind of pay homage, and it's part of their whole social and basically political power structure. And so the woman might be sitting there when this is happening to make her husband look good, showing that she's working wool. But you know, whether she actually does it when there's nobody around, who's going to enforce that, you know? And you know, it may be that women whispered to each other, she bought that, you know, she's not really doing that. But who knows? Nobody talked about it that I read. No. Oh, my little lady's here. So I made these before I finished this one.
That one just makes me think of Julia.
Yes, with the yellow. Fantastic. So she's the only one who's properly covering her head with her palette. Good on her. But I didn't want to hide, you know, the rest of the stolas. So this is the strap type, like I'm wearing now, and she's got the gold buttons for her too. This one is pinned. I just made a little faux pin for her. And then this one is a variation on the tube where you pin it in the center instead of at the edge. And so it's supposed to float down like this. There's a really nice statue at the Getty that shows this really beautifully. But this fabric was just too stiff. It's not doing it right. Yeah, my evolution. This is the first one I made. Like I said, it was a slightly heavier blue-gray wool that I pinned at the shoulder, and I still wear it. It's just part of my Romano British garb now, because it's too heavy and it's not long enough for me to do the hip fold. This was the second one I made, and it makes me really sad because it's gorgeous and was very expensive silk. But it's silk, it's not wool, so no good. I really like the braids. Unfortunately, it is also too short. There's no way to save this unless you need a silk dress, because you're about the only person who could wear this as a stola. Yeah. I'll probably take it apart and reuse the silk for something non-Roman. Thank you very much. So we got 5 minutes. And then, yeah, I've got like a navy one, which I made in a hurry for an event, but it's too dark. The darker colors were more for morning. So it's like a navy blue, which is a shame because it's a lovely weave. This one right now is my favorite. It is the most accurate one I have. I'm not super happy with the white warp threads in it. And I would like it to have an institia to cover my feet. So a couple of times it is mentioned as a sewn-in institia, and this is where I really wish my Latin was better because I'm relying on translations. And there was a kind of a battle, like in Sebesta, they talked in Sebesta's book 2001. Which is some of her earlier work, and I think she probably regrets this, but in the book she says, there's this mistake where it was mistranslated as a strap, but it was mistranslated as a flounce or a ruffle, but I think it's a strap. But all the other books talk about it as a sewn-in thing, and Ovid mentions it covering the feet, so that's why I've gone with, okay, if it's covering the feet, it's not a shoulder strap, right? In the pictures, they translate it as a ruffle or a flounce, but it doesn't have any, there's no textural change. It just goes straight down. It's just a contrast change. So that's why I opted for literally same fabric, just over dyed, and same length, so there's no ruffle, there's no pleats, just sewn in. And like I said, I think maybe that's for replacement, because this whole thing is, you don't want to have to reweave this every year, right? So if you can recycle it by changing your institia, that's not so bad. And if you go white, then you can always bleach it, right? Just toss it in some urine.
I just want to clarify that I'm remembering what you said again. For how they wove them in period to how they created the tube, the warp is going parallel with the ground or horizontal with the ground?
Okay, so the
Like
if
you're
this-
wearing it with the warp
the
horizontal
warp
to
is
the ground.
horizontal, yes.
Even
So,
when they wove it?
well, no, they would have woven it with the warp vertical.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, you except for the side band, right? Like if you're doing a decorative border, then when you weave it, you bring your your weft way out to the side and just leave all this extra string, and then you turn the whole thing, and now you have that tablet woven band becomes your the top of your weaving, and then so the weft becomes the warp. But the body, assuming that it's all plain, this is going to be woven sideways essentially, and then you take it off the loom and turn it, seam up the sides, and it's done. Does that help at all?
Warp parallel to the ground or horizontal?
Okay, it's a warp with a warp weighted loom.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just
Okay.
not clear what you're saying you believe it is.
As I'm wearing it, the strings that were the warp are now horizontal.
Okay.
It's turned.
Okay. Why do you think they would do that?
Because that way you get the selvage edges for the top and bottom, and you have to do a seam on the side anyway, so you want to have your unfinished edges at the top and bottom here, right? Does that make sense?
It does. Don't necessarily agree, but that's fine. That's fine.
Well,
I just want to know what you think and why you think it. It doesn't necessarily make it right or wrong. Or got me right or wrong.
Madron, that was Madron's feeling, and she's been studying this a long time, and I trust her opinions. I didn't find anything to contradict it. I didn't find anyone saying anything different in the books, and a number of the books did say that they were selvage edges top and bottom. So, well, it depends. Roman girls weren't this fat unless they were like super sedentary, right? They didn't have the caloric availabilities we do. So, in general, if it's about elbow to elbow, and so it's going to be longer this way, but it's still not going to be crazy. I mean, we're talking about average 5 foot tall person. It's not bad for a. If you set up a warp weighted loom that's, now I have to reverse this again, but if you have a, let's say you need 6 feet, that's like 3 feet across times 2. That's totally doable on a warp weighted loom, 6 feet high, right?
One that could go very wide as well.
Sure. Well, if you get too wide, you need 2 people. You need someone to operate the shed, and someone to throw the shuttles back and forth. But yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a very good presentation.
Thank you. I want to point out you happen to have the one. This is my motto for competition. It's just a stupid meme that was on Facebook a couple years ago, but this is like, competition is hard, but if you do it, then you've done it. So you should do it.